The rain fell heavily over Brooklyn's St. Anthony Cemetery that cold November morning, transforming the grounds into a somber landscape of grey stone and darker grey sky. Under a sea of black umbrellas, nearly 200 people gathered around the mahogany coffin of Vincent Castellano, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The mourners represented a cross-section of New York's underworld, men in expensive Italian suits, their faces carved by years of street life, stood alongside their families, creating an unusual tableau of grief that blended genuine sorrow with calculated respect. Vincent had been a legend in their world, a boss who commanded loyalty through intelligence rather than violence alone. At 68 years old, his unexpected heart attack had sent shockwaves through the 5 boroughs. He had been a father figure to some, a feared authority to others, and to everyone present, an irreplaceable piece of the city's hidden infrastructure. Tony Marchetti, Vincent's right-hand man for 20 years, stood closest to the coffin. His weathered face, marked by a scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, showed little emotion, but his jaw remained clenched throughout the ceremony. At 55, Tony had seen more funerals than he cared to remember, but this one cut deeper than any other. Vincent had pulled him off the streets when he was 19, gave him purpose, taught him that being smart lasted longer than being tough. Beside Tony stood Vincent's elderly mother, Rosa Castellano, a tiny woman of 92 who had buried her husband 40 years ago and now faced burying her only son. She dabbed her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief, her hands trembling despite the support of her daughter Maria. Rosa wore all black, as she had since her husband's death, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun that emphasized the sharp features she had passed to her son. Maria Castellano Santos, Vincent's younger sister, had spent her entire life trying to distance herself from the family business. At 63, she ran a successful accounting firm in Manhattan, legitimate and clean. Her 2 daughters stood behind her, both in their 30s. Both deliberately kept ignorant of their uncle's true occupation. They knew him only as the generous man who never missed a birthday, who paid for their college educations, who told terrible jokes at Christmas dinner. Father O'Brien, who had known the Castellano family for 3 decades, stood at the head of the coffin reciting prayers. He had long ago made peace with ministering to men whose souls carried heavy burdens. In his view, everyone deserved God's mercy, and he had watched Vincent donate generously to the church's charity programs, feeding hundreds of families in the neighborhood. The priest's words drifted through the ceremony, speaking of redemption and eternal rest, of a man's capacity for good despite his failings. The pallbearers, 6 men who had served under Vincent for decades, stood at attention, their faces masks of stoic grief. Each had their own story of how Vincent had changed their lives, protected their families, given them opportunities in a world that offered few. They waited for the signal to lower the coffin, completing the ritual that would mark the end of an era. Then something unusual happened. As Father O'Brien concluded the final prayers and gestured for the pallbearers to prepare the coffin for lowering, a commotion erupted near the cemetery gates. Heads turned as a German shepherd broke through the crowd, moving with determined purpose despite the muddy ground. The dog wore a police K9 vest, clearly marked with the NYPD insignia, and behind him, multiple officers called out desperately, their voices carrying panic and embarrassment. "Rex! Heel! Rex, come back here right now!" Detective Sarah Martinez pushed through the mourners, her police uniform soaked from the rain, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and genuine confusion. At 34, Martinez had been a K9 handler for 5 years, and Rex had never, not once, disobeyed a direct command like this. The dog ignored every command, every whistle, every desperate call. His focus remained absolute as he navigated through the sea of black-clad mourners, some of whom stepped back instinctively, unsure how to react to this unprecedented intrusion. Rex reached the coffin and immediately lay down beside it, his entire body pressed against the polished mahogany wood, as if trying to merge with it. A low whine escaped his throat, a sound of genuine grief that silenced the entire gathering more effectively than any command could have. The sound was haunting, primal, the kind of mourning that transcended species. Rex placed his paw on the coffin's edge, scratching gently at the wood, as if trying to reach the man inside. His whining grew more intense, desperate, heartbroken. Those closest could see tears forming in the dog's eyes, could see his entire body trembling with emotion. The mobsters exchanged suspicious glances that rippled through the crowd like electricity. Several hands moved instinctively toward concealed weapons beneath tailored jackets. The atmosphere shifted instantly from solemn mourning to dangerous tension. A police dog at their boss's funeral was bad enough. A police dog showing intimate knowledge of and affection for their boss was something else entirely. Tony stepped forward, his hand resting on the weapon at his hip beneath his coat, his eyes narrowing as he studied the animal's behavior with the careful assessment of a man who had survived 4 decades in a dangerous business by trusting his instincts. Something about this felt wrong, calculated, like the opening move in a game he didn't yet understand. "What kind of game is this?" he demanded, his voice carrying the rough edges of Brooklyn's streets, despite years of trying to smooth them out. He looked directly at Detective Martinez, his eyes cold and evaluating. "Your dog knew Vincent? You want to explain that to me? To all of us?" Martinez appeared genuinely bewildered, her confusion evident in every aspect of her body language. She approached cautiously, aware that she was alone among people who had little love for law enforcement, aware that the tension in the air could turn violent with very little provocation. I don't understand any of this. Rex has never done anything like this before. He was at the station when he suddenly bolted from the K9 unit. He ran nearly 3 miles to get here. I have no idea how he even knew where to go. Her words had the ring of truth, but Tony had learned long ago that sincerity could be performed as easily as deception. He gestured to 2 of his men, who moved to flank Martinez, not threatening but making clear she wasn't free to leave until this situation resolved itself. Father O'Brien, experienced in navigating the complicated waters of his parish's demographics, tried to continue the ceremony, his voice rising slightly to regain control of the situation. "Let us continue with our prayers for Vincent's eternal soul. We commit his body to the earth and his spirit to God's infinite mercy." But Rex wouldn't move. Every attempt to pull him away resulted in the dog digging in harder, his claws scoring the wet ground, his whining growing more desperate and heartbreaking. Martinez tried coaxing him with treats she pulled from her pocket, Rex's favorite beef jerky that had never failed to get his attention. The dog didn't even glance at them. She tried his favorite commands, the words they had trained with for years. Nothing worked. Officer Chen, Martinez's backup who had chased Rex from the station, arrived breathless, carrying a specialized K9 catch pole. "Should I restrain him?" "No," Martinez said quickly, seeing the dark expressions on the surrounding faces. "Just wait." The mourners shifted uncomfortably, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. Some saw it as disrespectful, a police presence violating the sanctity of their boss's final moments. Others, particularly the older women who had known Vincent all his life, felt an inexplicable sadness watching the dog's obvious distress. Animals didn't lie, didn't perform grief. Whatever connection existed between Rex and Vincent, it was real. Vincent's mother spoke softly, her voice carrying surprising authority despite her grief and advanced age. The crowd quieted immediately out of respect. "Let him stay. Something brings this creature here. Vincent always loved animals, even as a little boy. He would bring home strays, feed the neighborhood cats." She looked at the dog, with an expression of wonder mixed with sorrow. "If this one loved my Vincent, then he belongs here with us." Tony hesitated, torn between his instincts screaming danger and his deep respect for Rosa Castellano. After a long moment, he nodded reluctantly. "The dog stays, but you," he pointed at Martinez, "you stay too. We're going to have a conversation after this." The ceremony continued with Rex lying vigil beside the coffin, his presence transforming the funeral into something stranger and more poignant than anyone had anticipated. As Father O'Brien recited the final prayers and the pallbearers began lowering Vincent into the ground, Rex crawled to the edge of the grave, his whining becoming almost unbearable to hear. The sound carried such pure anguish that even the hardest men present felt something tighten in their chests. When the coffin reached the bottom of the grave, Rex tried to jump in after it. Martinez and Chen grabbed him, struggling to hold the 70-pound dog back as he fought with desperate strength. It took both officers and one of the pallbearers to restrain him, and even then, Rex's eyes never left the grave, his body straining toward it with every ounce of his considerable power. For 3 hours after the burial concluded, through continued rain and dropping temperatures, Rex remained at the graveside. He wouldn't accept food, wouldn't drink the water Martinez offered, wouldn't acknowledge any attempt at comfort. He simply lay at the edge of Vincent's grave, occasionally whining, his eyes fixed on the fresh earth, as if willing the man beneath to return. The mourners slowly dispersed, heading to Russo's restaurant for the traditional post-funeral gathering, but they departed in small groups, speaking in hushed, confused tones. More than one person looked back at the cemetery, at the unusual sight of a police dog mourning a mobster, wondering what it could possibly mean. Tony remained until the end, watching from beneath his umbrella, his mind working through possibilities and implications. Beside him, Sal Romano, the organization's accountant and advisor, adjusted his rain-spotted glasses and spoke quietly. "This changes things, Tony. We need to understand what this means." "I know," Tony replied, his voice grim. "I know." The incident at the cemetery became the talk of both the police department and the streets within hours. In an age of smartphones and social media, footage of Rex refusing to leave Vincent's coffin had been captured by multiple mourners and spread rapidly through various networks. The Italian restaurants of Little Italy buzzed with speculation. The bars in Brooklyn argued theories. The police stations throughout the 5 boroughs debated what it could mean. Detective Sarah Martinez sat in Captain Williams's office at the 73rd Precinct, feeling like a student called to the principal's office. Williams, a 28-year veteran with grey hair and the permanent squint of someone who had seen too much, leaned back in his chair and studied her with undisguised frustration. "Explain to me, Detective, how your K9 partner ends up at a mobster's funeral showing more emotion than I've seen from him in 5 years of service." Williams's voice carried the flat tone of someone trying very hard to remain professional. Martinez had been asking herself the same question for hours. "Captain, I have no explanation. Rex was in his kennel at the K9 unit. I was completing paperwork after our morning patrol. At approximately 10:15 a.m., Officer Davis radioed that Rex had somehow opened his kennel and bolted from the building. We tracked him using his GPS collar to St. Anthony Cemetery. And you had no idea Vincent Castellano was being buried there?" "None, sir. I don't monitor organized crime funerals as part of my regular duties." Williams pulled up footage on his computer, one of the videos that had been sent to the department. He turned the screen so Martinez could see it clearly, Rex lying against the coffin, his anguish unmistakable. "That's not normal behavior, Detective. That's bonding behavior. That's grief from personal connection." Martinez watched the video, feeling a knot forming in her stomach. "I know, sir." "Has Rex ever been deployed in operations targeting the Castellano organization?" "Not to my knowledge. I've reviewed his deployment history since the incident. He's been assigned to narcotics work, patrol support and building searches. Nothing that would have brought him into direct contact with Vincent Castellano. Williams drummed his fingers on his desk, a habit that indicated deep thought. Here's what bothers me, Martinez. Either your dog had unauthorized contact with a known organized crime figure, which suggests a security breach, or someone trained him to react this way, which suggests an operation I'm not aware of. Either way, we have a serious problem. Sir, with respect, there's a third possibility. Rex could have encountered Castellano in a context we don't have records for. Maybe years ago, before Rex was even assigned to me. Then find out. I want a complete investigation into Rex's history, every handler, every deployment, every moment of his service career. If there's a connection to Castellano, I want it found. Meanwhile, in a private room at Russo's restaurant in Little Italy, Tony Marchetti called an emergency meeting of Vincent's inner circle. The restaurant, closed to regular patrons for the day, served as a gathering place for those closest to the late boss. In a room at the back, insulated from listening devices by expensive countermeasures that swept for bugs twice daily, 6 men sat around a heavy wooden table that had witnessed countless important conversations over the decades. Sal Romano, the organization's accountant and strategic advisor, sat to Tony's right. At 49, Sal had a master's degree in finance from Columbia University and could have worked anywhere on Wall Street. Instead, he had chosen to use his talents managing the complex financial networks that kept the organization running. His nervous habit of adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses intensified under stress. To Tony's left sat Marco Big Mark Vitelli, the organization's enforcer. At 6'4" and 250 pounds, Marco's presence alone usually solved problems before they required violence. He had known Vincent since they were teenagers running numbers in Queens. Across the table sat 3 other senior members. Johnny Rossi, who managed their construction interests, Frank DeLuca, who handled relationships with legitimate businesses, and Pete Catalano, who ran their waste management operations. Each man had 20-plus years in the organization. Each had prospered under Vincent's leadership, and each now faced an uncertain future. Tony lit a cigarette despite the no-smoking laws, a small act of defiance that somehow felt necessary. "Something's not right," he began, his Brooklyn accent thickening as it always did when he was stressed. "A cop dog doesn't mourn a mob boss without reason. Either Vincent had a connection we didn't know about, or this is some elaborate setup by the feds." The room fell silent. These were men trained never to speak carelessly, to weigh every word for potential consequences. Sal Romano adjusted his glasses nervously, his analytical mind already running through scenarios. Could Vincent have been informing? Could that dog have been part of surveillance or a handler relationship? The suggestion hung in the air like poison gas. The idea that Vincent, their legendary boss, the man who had taught most of them everything they knew, might have betrayed them was almost unthinkable. Yet the dog's behavior demanded explanation, and in their world, the simplest explanation for a boss having intimate contact with law enforcement usually involved cooperation. "Vincent never gave us up," Tony said firmly, though he couldn't quite keep the doubt from creeping into his voice. "In 40 years, he never once cooperated with police. Never got arrested, never got questioned, never gave them anything they could use. But we need to know the truth. We need to understand what that dog means." Marco leaned forward, his massive hands folded on the table, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Tony, we all loved Vincent, but we'd be stupid to ignore this. What operations have failed in the last few years? What investigations got too close? The question forced them to think critically, to examine their recent history through a lens of potential betrayal. It was Johnny Rossi who spoke first, pulling out his phone to check notes. Operation Silent Night 3 years ago, the feds had a massive task force targeting us. They had wiretaps, surveillance, the works. Then it all fell apart. Evidence disappeared, witnesses recanted, the whole thing collapsed. "We thought we got lucky," Pete added. "We thought our lawyers just outmaneuvered them. Or someone on the inside was managing it," Sal said quietly, "feeding them enough to look good while protecting us from anything serious." Tony stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. "Here's what we do. We investigate quiet and careful. We look at every operation in the last 10 years. We look at what got busted and what didn't. We follow the dog. I want to know everything about that K9, where it came from, who trained it, where it's been. And we do this without making noise, because if the other families hear we're questioning Vincent's loyalty, we'll have bigger problems than we can handle." Across town, Detective Martinez pursued her own investigation with the same intensity. She sat in the archives of the K9 unit, surrounded by filing cabinets containing decades of service records. Rex had been recruited from a specialized breeding program in Germany 5 years ago, trained at the NYPD facility in the Bronx, and assigned to her after his certification. She accessed Rex's medical records, looking for anything unusual. Dr. Ellen Chen, the veterinarian who provided Rex's medical care, had mentioned something about an injury 3 years ago. Martinez dug deeper, finding the incident report. Rex had sustained a gunshot graze on his shoulder during a raid. The report indicated he received treatment at the police clinic, but Dr. Chen had no follow-up records. That gap bothered Martinez. Protocol required detailed documentation of any K9 injury, especially gunshot wounds. She checked the date, November 15th, 3 years ago. Then she cross-referenced it with major operations happening at that time. Operation Silent Night appeared immediately, a massive task force targeting the Castellano organization. According to the files, Rex had been assigned to the task force temporarily for building searches, but when Martinez pulled the specific deployment records, they were heavily redacted. Entire sections had been blacked out, marked with classifications above her security level. That shouldn't have been possible for a simple narcotics K9. She tried logging in with her credentials to request access and received an automated denial with a reference number pointing to a closed FBI case. FBI involvement meant something much bigger than a local operation. Martinez sat back, her mind racing. Why would the FBI have classified information about her dog? Why would those records still be sealed 3 years later? She decided to visit the cemetery after dark, a decision driven more by instinct than logic. Rex had finally been coaxed away from Vincent's grave late that afternoon, but he remained depressed at the station, refusing to eat, refusing to work. She needed to understand what had happened to him. At the gravesite, fresh flowers had been placed, expensive roses arranged in the shape of a cross, the kind of elaborate arrangement that cost hundreds of dollars. They seemed too fresh to have been left during the funeral. Martinez approached carefully, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Tucked beneath the roses, protected by clear plastic, she found a photograph. She picked it up carefully, holding it under her flashlight. The image showed a younger Vincent Castellano, probably in his 60s, sitting on a park bench somewhere in Brooklyn. Beside him sat a German shepherd puppy, maybe 4 months old. Vincent's hand rested on the puppy's head, and his face showed an expression of genuine warmth that seemed at odds with his reputation. Martinez turned the photo over. On the back, written in faded ink but still legible, were words that made her blood run cold. "To my only true friend, V.C." She stared at the photograph, her mind struggling to process the implications. Vincent Castellano, one of New York's most notorious mob bosses, had known Rex as a puppy, had bonded with him enough to consider him a true friend. But how? When? Why? Martinez photographed the picture with her phone, then carefully replaced it beneath the flowers. Someone, likely Maria, Vincent's sister, had left it there knowing it would mean something to those who found it. It was a clue, but to what? She returned to headquarters and logged into the database, using Rex's biometric collar ID to access files. The collar contained not just GPS and vital signs monitoring, but also security clearances for certain restricted areas and databases. It was a security feature designed to ensure K9 handlers could access necessary information during emergencies. When she entered Rex's caller ID along with her own credentials, a hidden folder appeared in the classified section. Operation Shepherd. Her access level shouldn't have allowed her to open it, but Rex's biometric caller ID, still logged into her computer, granted entry as if he were an active participant in the operation. Martinez hesitated, knowing that accessing classified files without proper authorization could end her career. But the mystery of Rex's behavior, the photograph, the sealed records, it all pointed to something important, something she needed to understand. She clicked the folder open, and what she read made her gasp aloud in the empty office. The classified files detailed an operation so secret that only 3 people had known about it. Vincent Castellano, his FBI handler Agent David Morrison, and Rex, who had served not just as a police dog, but as Vincent's personal protection and communication link for nearly 4 years. Martinez read through the documentation with growing astonishment, each page revealing layers of deception and courage that redefined everything she thought she knew about both Vincent Castellano and her own partner. Vincent had been recruited as a confidential informant for the FBI nearly 15 years ago, following the death of his wife from cancer. According to the files, Maria Castellano's illness and death had transformed Vincent, forcing him to confront the reality of his life choices. He had approached the FBI through an intermediary, offering information in exchange for protection for his family and assurances that his organization would be guided toward less violent operations. The arrangement had been unprecedented. Vincent didn't want witness protection or to leave his life. Instead, he proposed something far more complex. He would provide information that dismantled rival organizations and prevented violence, while maintaining his position to protect his family from retaliation. The FBI would have a man inside one of New York's major crime families, and Vincent would have the cover to transform his organization from the inside. Agent David Morrison, a 20-year veteran of organized crime investigations, had handled Vincent personally. The documentation detailed their careful dance, information that prevented murders, stopped territory wars, dismantled drug operations that targeted schools and neighborhoods. Vincent had used his position not to save himself, but to reduce harm, to steer his organization toward illegal activities that hurt fewer people. But the arrangement had required extraordinary security measures. Vincent couldn't wear a wire, couldn't take regular meetings, couldn't do anything that might tip off the paranoid men around him. That's where Rex came in. The German Shepherd puppy had been specially selected from a breeding program known for producing dogs with exceptional intelligence and loyalty. He had been trained not just in standard K9 skills, but in specialized communication techniques. Rex could carry messages in a waterproof compartment in his collar, could signal certain situations through specific behaviors, and most importantly, could serve as Vincent's early warning system and protection. The official story had Rex assigned to various NYPD units, but in reality, the dog spent significant time with Vincent during periods documented as advanced training. They had built an unbreakable bond, the kind that only forms between a person and an animal, when their survival depends on trusting each other completely. 3 years ago, the arrangement had nearly ended in disaster. According to the mission reports Martinez was reading, members of the rival Santoro family had learned that someone in the Castellano organization was providing information to law enforcement. They didn't know who, but they planned to send a message by targeting Vincent himself. The attack had come at Vincent's home in Bay Ridge. 3 men with automatic weapons prepared to execute the boss they suspected of betrayal. But Rex had been there that night, ostensibly visiting as part of a community outreach program that Vincent occasionally hosted for neighborhood children interested in police work. A clever cover that explained regular contact between a mob boss and a police K9. The dog's instincts had detected the danger before the attack began. His aggressive behavior had alerted Vincent, giving him seconds to prepare. In the resulting confrontation, Rex had taken a bullet meant for Vincent, a grazing wound to his shoulder that had nonetheless been serious enough to require immediate medical attention. Vincent had personally transported Rex to a secure veterinary facility, staying with the dog through surgery and the initial recovery period. It was during those weeks, according to Agent Morrison's notes, that the bond between man and dog had deepened from professional necessity to genuine love. Vincent had nursed Rex back to health, spending hours talking to the dog, sharing thoughts and fears he could never voice to another human being. The official story about Rex being injured during a raid on a drug operation had been elaborate cover, complete with falsified incident reports and witness statements. It had worked because few people thought to question the details of a canine injury, especially when the dog recovered and returned to service. Martinez found herself fighting tears as she read through the files. All the time she had wondered why Rex seemed distracted, why he occasionally exhibited behaviors that didn't fit his training, why he sometimes appeared to be listening for something she couldn't hear. It all made sense now. Rex had been living a double life, serving 2 masters, maintaining a secret that could never be revealed. Agent Morrison had died 2 years ago from cancer, his final reports noting his pride in Operation Shepherd's success. Over 15 years, Vincent's information had prevented an estimated 47 murders, stopped 3 major territory wars before they could escalate, and led to the arrests of numerous violent criminals from rival organizations. He had protected his own organization while simultaneously reducing its capacity for serious harm, slowly steering it toward white-collar crimes that, while still illegal, didn't leave bodies in the streets.